6:10. I'm calling a meeting to order at this time. And then your Francis is going to be roll call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Was Michelle Pierre?
Present.
Kevin Syke?
Present.
Joey Lane, of course, present. I'm here, and that's here for the community. Vice Chair. Can you see?
Yes, okay. Well, since I have no idea whatsoever what I'm doing.
If you get it wrong, we'll let you know.
Dr. Harris.
All right.
Thank you very much.
So for this evening, we just want to adjust the agenda just a little bit slightly because I know we have some of our board members that have to leave out at 7 o'clock. So there's been some changes that happened last week that we need to kind of bring to everybody's attention and bring everybody fast track. So with Mayor Benamy term ending, and he actually not ending, he resigned, and with him resigning, certain board appointments, meaning Randy, is now off the board. So now we need to select a new board chair, whether vice chair wants to move up to board chair, I'll let you all have that discussion. But the chair position needs to be refilled, which also means, Kevin, your term as a District 4 representative is no longer the District 4 representative. The vice mayor, well, now the mayor is appointing you, reappointing you as his appointee as mayor. So you won't be District 4 representative anymore. The new position of the District 4 seat, which now council is accepting applications, resumes for the District 4, that individual will have the opportunity to select whom he or she wants for the District 4 seat. So now you're going to be reappointed on the January 10th meeting for the mayor.
So I can go home now?
No, you're still on the board. You're just representing the mayor.
I just thought maybe.
No, you're not District 4, you're the mayor's appointee. So that was a good thing. Same thing with Andre, because the mayor's term, he resigned, even though he was appointed by the police department, his term ended technically, but the police chief and the police department has reappointed him. So he's reappointed. Those are like moving chess last week. So I'm bringing this to you all's attention.
So the only position in play is Randy.
Randy's seat in the District 4. And then of course we still automatically said Scott Dalvin's seat still vacant. But I'm bringing this to your attention because this is probably one of the first items of business that we're going to probably have to start working on getting this ordinance changed. Because as you can see, it's like shuffling cars and it makes difficult things to get business done, right? Yeah. For you all. So I just want to open up the floor real quickly to entertain a motion related to if any of you are interested in serving as chair.
Well, I chaired the planning commission for 30 years. So I have 20 years. Well, I chaired it for 20. I served on it for 30. So I have 20 years of banging the gavel if necessary, but I would first yield to our vice chair, give him the option to move up if he so chooses.
Would you then be the vice chair?
If you don't want to be vice chair, I can be in first position, second position. I can play catcher if I have to.
The only advantage, there's a negative and a positive. The negative is that I don't really know what I'm doing. The positive is I have a good staff at my office that can assist and help and do a lot of legwork that would have to be done. So then you all decide. It certainly would not insult me. I mean, Andre, of course, he was the mayor. He has a lot of know-how how to.
I'm happy to leave you as vice chair if that's where you want to stay. It's good experience. You don't learn till you do it.
Okay, so then I would be fine with being chair.
Okay, so you nominating yourself? Is there a second?
So are you moving up as chair, or are you going into staying as vice chair?
He's moving up as chair.
Okay, so I'm confused. You want to be chair or you want to be vice chair?
I would be happy to be chair.
Okay, fine, that's fine.
Okay, so you
There's
move
a second.
second it. Okay.
Yeah,
Any
I'm not
further
greedy.
discussion? Okay, all in favor by the side of aye?
All right.
Aye.
Those against say nay. All right, so Rabbi is now the chair. Now that opens up the seat for vice chair.
So we would recommend Kevin to be vice chair.
So you move Rose for Kevin to be the vice chair. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Rabbi. And then any further questions, discussions? All in favor, side of aye. Those against?
And young lady, why you're not eating a latke?
Well, I will in a few
They're
minutes.
completely dietetic. You, on Hanukkah, there's two things. On the Sabbath, which Dr. Harris knows, you can eat and do anything you want, you don't gain weight. And on Hanukkah, doesn't apply, but I'm saying it applies. So
Mhm.
I wanted more people to get more latkes out.
Yeah, that's okay.
And then take home.
So what's the name of what you are eating?
It's a potato latke.
Okay,
And
thank
it's
you.
spelled what, Latka? How do you spell Latka?
K-E-S.
K-E-S.
But it's like a Yiddish word, it's not even Hebrew, it's like, a combination.
So I always heard them pronounced as Lucky,
Thank you so very much, Nicholas.
That's
but I,
non-Jews who tried to pronounce.
Do you have a
what it is.
knife?
okay, so that was from
Okay.
the non-Jewish side, the Goya side.
The guy decided to pronounce it, but try.
Okay,
So the next item of business, I want to let you all know, you had preferred that I go back and find out in reference to and based on consensus and looking across the calendars for the month of February, starting in the month of February, we will be meeting on the second Monday of every month, starting at 7 p.m. So from 7 to 8:30 or 9. But we blocked it up to 9 o'clock.
and that starts
And
in
we'll be in the
February.
council chambers.
Council chambers.
And that will start February 2nd, 13th of February. All right.
I had to put that on my calendar while we sit here and talk about it.
So we're going to be at secretary. I will update and send that to everyone via calendar invite, and then it will be posted on the city's website from now moving forward. And those meetings will all be live streamed and so on and so forth.
Good.
So those are the two major things that I want us to discuss. Some of these other items we can discuss later on. I'm gonna go ahead and pass over to Cammie so she can go ahead and dive in because I know anything about
Just
that.
before that, I don't know if you might give me a minute,
Okay.
just for the record. As some of you may know, that I am a candidate for District 4.
Right.
I'm running for District 4 with everything that moves so fast. And I will also be one of the applicants for that on the agenda for that would not be good.
Yeah.
As a proud secretary of the board, you know, there's things that we need to know in advance that we news for anyone on board. So just in case, so I'll be one of those applicants.
Are there a lot of applicants?
So far, like I'm about 2.
I wonder if Randy's apply or not. He's in District 4 too. Able to start.
Our internet connection is unstable. I wonder.
Yeah, can you guys
Our
hear
internet
me?
is unstable.
Yeah,
We
I'm
hear
getting
you.
it. I'm getting a, well, the video's completely off now. Oh, there it is. But I'm getting a notice that your bandwidth is really low and it's very difficult for me to understand anything that anyone's saying.
Yes, something happened here in the building today that one, we don't have AC in here. Number two, our internet connection is having difficulty internet connections. But we hear you now and selected our new officers based upon what you and I discussed with our new mayor being appointed in our ordinance and stuff like that. Just so you know, Assistant City Manager, she just walked in the room. Anisha Daniel. Anisha. Daniel.
Hello, how are you?
This is Cammie, so she's with NACO. She's with our National Association.
Hi, Anisha. Good to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and put, you should be able to share now, Cammie.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so if at any point you have a hard time hearing me, just let me know and we'll try to figure out what we can do at your end. Maybe as a last resort, you can turn the video off on your end. That might help with the bandwidth. We'll just see how this goes and do the best we can. So it's great being back with all of you again tonight. I apologize. I am recovering from the flu and now just have a horrible cold. So I feel like I sound like Rudolph from the Claymation series with my nose plugged up. So I do apologize if I'm difficult to understand. I'll try to be as clear as possible. But tonight we're going to do talk about several things. But before we do that, I just want to make sure there aren't any questions from our last training session last Monday.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Okay.
No questions.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Hearing none, let's move on to what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to go back and talk about the conducting oversight in North Miami, which is something left over from the first module, training module that we have not yet had a chance to get to. So we're just going to go through a few things there very quickly. Then we're going to talk about minimum training standards for civilian oversight practitioners. Follow that by identifying and addressing challenges and opportunities. And then we're going to close things out by having all of you talk about identifying next steps, including big things that you'd like to accomplish, but also small things. Just maybe even just upcoming tasks that you'd like to make sure are on the books so that you can get them done. So those are the things that we're going to talk about tonight. And for the sake of time, we'll just go ahead and move right into conducting civilian oversight in North Miami. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I know that your attorney had talked a little bit about some of the ordinance, mostly the legal aspects. I'm going to talk about this much more from a civilian oversight perspective. You have a very interesting ordinance with a lot of authority, and then also some other interesting nuances that you just talked about, essentially, and we'll talk about a little bit more when we get to composition. But we're going to talk about the purpose, why you exist, the form you take when we talk about composition, staffing, who's doing the work of the oversight entity on a day-to-day basis. And then we're going to talk about procedures and duties, how you carry out the authorities given to you through the ordinance of the city's code. So first, let's start with purpose. So the stated intent for the body is to be an impartial review panel conducting independent reviews and holding hearings concerning complaints and grievances. The ordinance spells that out very plainly. But how do you do that? So, and what kind of shape does that actually take? So you're a mechanism for external community fact-finding and dispute resolution. You monitor and review civilian complaints of police misconduct by members of the North Miami Police Department. Your office conducts independent investigations, dispute resolution proceedings, public hearings, and fact-finding concerning complaints filed by the public, or as you know from the conversation with the attorney, by the Citizens Investigative Board itself. Carry out fair and timely evaluations, public hearings, and fact findings concerning the review of the law enforcement policies, procedures, practices, and patterns of behavior. It's a really important piece of your authorities and purpose. Not all oversight agencies have that, and it's really, a while back we talked about proactive versus reactive, and that is the piece that's the proactive piece of what you can do, making change to change things in the way that misconduct doesn't occur in the future. And another piece that's outlined in your purpose is making written recommendations and reports to the mayor and city council. So your composition and qualifications of the board. So every board, every ordinance, this is a little different, and yours is no exception to that. Just in the qualifications, let's start there. Groups given consideration, retired law enforcement, and some interesting pieces in your ordinance is that consideration should also be given to a retired member of the judiciary, professional in the fields of human resources, faith-based work, social justice, and civil rights law. And although you as members of the initial panel, you were appointed through a nomination panel outlined in the ordinance. And then from this point forward, nominations will be taken and the city clerk will maintain those nominations until an appointment will be made going forward. Other parts of the composition is 7 members, and the ordinance is very clear that it's reflecting racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity of the city of North Wayne. I'm sorry, was someone trying to say something?
No.
Okay, sorry. Must be qualified electors with a reputation for civic pride, integrity, responsibility, and demonstrated interest in public affairs and service, which is that is a very interesting part of your ordinance, because how that is defined is really kind of, I guess, up to the appointer. The person who does appoint a particular seat has some room for judgment on all of those things. It does say that consideration should be given to specific groups, which I mentioned before, and that no one with a felony conviction or any crime involving moral turpitude be included. So kind of taking out people with lived experience, formerly incarcerated individuals. So the other piece of this, though, as Dr. Harris mentioned earlier, is that piece about terms. And although much of what's in the composition piece of your ordinance is, although it might be a little different here and there, it's not uncommon to see any of these things in one form or another. Your terms are having what is the word they use? Coterminous, which is, I have to tell you, I've never used that word in my my life before, but coterminous, your terms being coterminous with the appointing authority or appointing person is something I have never seen in an ordinance before. And so as you all are witnessing right now, it does give the possibility of disruption to the process. And so hopefully I'll be sending over some examples of how that might be able to, how that looks in other jurisdictions. Most of the time there are specific terms, times for the terms, such as, 3, sometimes 2 years, and that they are staggered. So the initial body would have, for 7 people might have 3 people appointed for 3 years, 2 people appointed for 2 years, and 2 people appointed for 1 year, to make sure that there was always a continuity on the board. So that's just something to think about in the future. But I guess the important piece at this point is just kind of understanding the makeup of your board and why you're here and what you're representing. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the staffing. So, and I'm sure Dr. Harris can give you much more of his thoughts on this, because he'll be dealing with the staffing for the unforeseeable future. But really, the staffing has a lot to do with budgetary considerations. The budget of the office is set to equate to no more than 1.5 of the police budget. So you have a ceiling, not a basement. So if my numbers are correct with the current police budget, you would never be able to have more than about $440,000 in the budget.
446,000.
Thank you.
Right. 5%.
Yeah, so that's so one thing to consider is that if at any time when the ordinance is opened up and maybe more authority is given, that would need to be considered, since you have that ceiling rather than a floor. We've seen some other agencies in other jurisdictions where that's a fine number given where they start, but then when other duties are put on, piled onto the office, then they might need more staffing, and that becomes difficult with those kinds of dollar figures. But considering that's where you are right now, then let's just focus with what you have currently. So right now, there has to be a minimum of 2 employees. And so that's the executive director and the admin at this point, with a contractor investigator and a legal counsel that's contracted on an hourly basis. And then I know that at some point there's the ability to bring on, for instance, an investigator full-time, but it all boils down to budgetary considerations. And I, if you'll remember when we talked about the principles of oversight, the being adequately funded is one of the principles for effective oversight. And so making sure that that's constant on the top of everybody's minds when budgets happen, that there's plenty of support for the office, so that you're not the only ones fighting for what you need, but you also have other stakeholders out there helping to fight for you. Kind of like we talked about when we were talking about community engagement with your stakeholders, not only for the present, but for the future. Before I move on, did you want to add anything to that, Dr. Harris?
No, that's good.
Okay. Okay, well, so then let's quickly get into procedures. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because most of this, your attorney had gone through. So as he mentioned, you do have directly filed cases, can be filed by a member of the CIB or staff, as well as a member of the public. The allegations must be police misconduct, police use of force, or other matters pertaining to repeated issues of police misconduct. You can have them filed in writing. And then can you remind me, Dr. Harris, will you also be allowing them to be, that you do have an online portal for your complaints?
Yes, the complaints are all done online, honestly.
Okay.
Even if they fill it out even if they fill out our hard copy form, we still import it online.
Perfect. Okay, great. And I have to say, post 2020 that is one of the silver linings of the COVID era, is that before COVID, there were probably more offices than not that could not accept complaints online. They had to come in person and file them. And so now it's really nice because we see more and more agencies moving towards, like you're doing, everything is online, making it easier for the public to access. You do have a lot of pieces in the ordinance about notification. And so the police department has to be notified of the complaint within 2 working days of its filed. The complaints must be filed with the CIB within 1 year of the date of the incident, or 1 year from the complaint becoming aware of the systemic problem. The complaint can be filed beyond its limits if it's approved by a majority vote of your board. So when we're talking about the investigation or review of the cases, the director first has to determine that the complaint does not involve potentially criminal conduct, which I know you guys all talked extensively about a couple of meetings ago. So I won't go into that at this point unless there's additional questions. But the CIB has to automatically commence an independent investigation into any incident in which a police shooting or other use of force resulting in the death of a person, and may commence an independent investigation into any use of force resulting in great bodily harm to a person. In other words, you don't have to wait for a complaint to come in because you're mandated to do those investigations. But again, first, there has to be the determination that the complaint does not involve potentially criminal conduct. And that is one of the things that becomes really important in civilian oversight, where you have to make sure that the administrative investigation does not interfere with a criminal investigation, because you don't want to jeopardize the criminal investigation. But also, leeway has to be given so that once you have the clear that you can have access to information to finalize the administrative investigation. The other part about this process that's important is that the closeout of reports of all investigations of misconduct conducted by internal affairs has to be sent to the CIB within 3 days of the chief's final decision. And at this point, the staff, CIB's staff, will have access to the entire investigative file for inspection and copying unless otherwise determined confidential. The affected officer and complainants must be notified when the CIB commences an investigation or review. And as far as timeframes are concerned in this area, the CIB's investigation must commence within 10 working days of the filing and must be completed to present to the CIB within 180 days of the investigation's commencement. When reviewing internal affairs investigations, the board must complete its review within 35 working days of the. If the time frame is not adhered to, unfortunately, the case is closed. However, when a complaint is directly filed with the CIB, the CIB may extend the time frame for the investigation to be completed and presented to the CIB for its final consideration within 60 days after the receipt of the internal affairs investigation file. So there are in several instances, there are ways that you can extend those dates. But for most investigations that you'll be doing, adhering to the 180 days is going to be really important. And then the 35 days from completion of an investigation till review is also going to be something that you're going to want to try to maintain. One of the things that we see often happen is that, particularly when you might have, or something to be prepared for is if you have several investigations that are very intense. Lots, I mean, you could have something that has, 20 body cams to review the footage of, all sorts of different outside videos, lots of witnesses to interview, and all of that can take a lot of time, particularly if you have to track things down. And so if you have multiple of those cases to be investigated at the same time, that time frame is going to feel very tight, just because you have a limited staff. And so those are things to be mindful of, so that you don't find yourself in a place where something gets dismissed because of capacity issues. Just something to think about. It's something that all oversight agencies deal with, but definitely something that if you can think about a plan for when that happens before it happens, it will be better. Some other considerations while we're talking about that, you have the ability to review and make recommendations to the chief regarding policies, procedures, and practices, including training, recruitment, and disciplinary procedures. So those are all fairly strong authorities, and really has the ability to make a difference in the work that you're doing, and therefore the work that the police are doing and how they're doing it. One of the things I really liked that I saw in your ordinance is that the chief must respond in writing within 45 days of the recommendation. Having that requirement is imperative, so that things don't just sit and languish. That way the public has a way of knowing why something was accepted or why something wasn't accepted. I think that's really important, and then that's all information that, as much of it as legally able, can be put into your annual report, which then further brings transparency to that process. The CIB is also required to issue or publish a final report regarding each matter reviewed. The report is to be sent to the mayor and the city council. Within 45 days of receiving that report, the mayor must submit a report that provides an accounting of all actions taken in response to the final report that you, the CIB, filed, and all recommendations that were made. So you're bringing that transparency not only to the police department, but then also there is a requirement and responsibility in the elected officials level to also respond and also make things publicly available. And then also, and it's important to note that you have the ability to subpoena witnesses, documents, or any other potential evidence for all matters within your jurisdiction. Now, hopefully you'll be like a lot of oversight entities and have to rarely, if ever, use the subpoena power. It's a great thing to have in your back pocket in case there's not cooperation, but hopefully the hope is always that you won't need it, and that there will be a level of cooperation that exists where that information is readily handed over. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about is that when you are reviewing cases, there will be the results or dispositions of the investigations. And so I just wanted to go over all of these with you just quickly so everybody has a good understanding of the different levels. And it is interesting, although many oversight agencies use the same terms, the sustained, not sustained, exonerated, and unfounded, not everyone uses the exact same terms to describe those words and those levels of action. And then also I want to talk specifically with you about policy failure, which is your fifth option. And very few oversight agencies have policy failure. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. So sustained, that means the investigation produced a preponderance of evidence, meaning it's been proven that something is more likely than not. That's to substantiate the allegation made in the complaint. Not sustained means the investigation failed to produce the preponderance of evidence to either prove or disprove the allegation. Exonerated means the alleged conduct occurred, but the actions of the employee were within policy and procedure. And unfounded means that the allegation concerns an act that did not occur. And sometimes that could mean that someone filed a complaint on a particular officer at a particular, for something that happened somewhere, and that officer was not on duty that day, or enough information was gathered that the incident never occurred, whether that's through body cam or through witness investigation. But then the next one, policy failure. I have to tell you, I love seeing this in your ordinance, because it's a finding or conclusion that current policies, procedures, rules, or regulations were either non-existent or inadequate. In other words, the employee followed policy, but the policies may need to be changed. I think that there are, when I was on a review board, when I've talked to other review boards across the country, everybody is so frustrated by that complaint that is exonerated, where because it's completely within policy, but everybody is like, that just doesn't seem right. That's not how we should be handling it necessarily, but there's nothing you can do because the officer did exactly what they were supposed to do according to policy and procedure. So that's where policy failure comes in, and which then leads you into the next step of making recommendations for policies that would have been better in place for this particular situation moving forward. One last thing I'll talk about on this is that the CIB does have the ability to formulate recommendations to the mayor and city council regarding the disposition of a case, including recommendations for training, revision of policy, police policies or procedures, or when a complaint has been sustained, the consequences for the subject officer or officers. But it's very important to remember that those are recommendations. And as you'll remember from the last slide, those recommendations have to be responded to, but they're not, they can't be mandated. So as I promised, that was a very quick overview of your ordinance. Are there any questions before I move on to the next section?
Can I ask something that just came into my head? It's not exactly this. With today's findings from the July 6th committee, are we basically that type of committee, if you compare, meaning they now came up with their recommendation, and then that's where for them it ends? They have no further authority. Are we in that same position where we meet?
It essentially, but with some slight nuances to it. So you have the ability to, someone else is like whether it's the staff of the CIB or it's internal affairs, they're doing the investigations, and you have the ability to review and essentially agree or disagree. So that's a little different. There, you can ask for more information, and when the investigation is done by the CIB staff, you know, you tend to be able to monitor that maybe a little more closely. So that's a little different in that you as a board are not actually hands-on guiding the investigations. But the end result is very similar, is that you're handed something, these findings, and you can either agree or disagree with them. And you can state your agreement and you can state your disagreement or the policy recommendations that come out of that disagreement. But you don't have any power to mandate it. The best that happens is that there has to be a response, and a response in writing that explains why it's been agreed or disagreed with. which then becomes public, and the public then has the ability to then have better understanding of the potential policy failure, for instance, and the recommendations and what's not or is being implemented because of it. It just opens up the whole opaque process into a much more transparent one, which I do think that is also a little different because the end goal is more transparency. I hope that answers your question. Anything else? Okay. So next we're going to talk about training for effective civilian oversight. So one thing that your ordinance doesn't very specifically lay out are the training requirements. You need to be trained, but it doesn't necessarily, there are ordinances out there that say you need 20 hours of this training and 16 hours of this training. And so in a way, having those guidelines makes it easier, but not having them kind of opens the world up to you to be able to get different kinds of training that you need, depending on the types of cases you're seeing, the work you want to do, and your ultimate goals. So for board and commission members, I think it's really important to know about the policies and procedures of your law enforcement agency. I am a proponent of receiving training directly from the police department. Now, I don't think that you need training on everything from the police department. There are some things that you will never have come across your desk, certain policies and procedures. But I think working with the police department and collaboratively putting together a syllabus of things that will help you do your job better, give you the information you need to be successful, is really where you should start. So some of those things might be things such as traffic stops. How are police officers trained on traffic stops? How are they trained to respond to domestic violence calls? Things like that. And I think also what you need training on might change over time. And so having the flexibility to be able to say, hey, we've seen 3 complaints on this. We need to know more about why officers respond in this way. And having that relationship where you can bring in someone from the department to train on it, I think will be very helpful. I think also essentials of civilian oversight, obviously, selfishly, that's absolutely what I think you should be trained on. But I do think it helps you know a little bit more about the work. I mean, no one that comes into this position, or very few people who come into the position of a civilian oversight board or panel member, are experts on police policy, procedures, or civilian oversight. And so getting the information so you know how to do the job and feel like you can do it successfully is only fair. And then also the authority and responsibilities of the work that you're supposed to do. So training should happen soon. Yes.
Do me a favor, stop sharing and then reshare again your screen, because we got booted out and we just came back in.
Oh, okay. Are you still there? Okay, can you hear me?
Did it stop sharing?
Okay, we'll stop again.
Share.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Nothing's coming up.
Yeah, I can hear that you're saying something, but I can't hear what you're saying. Okay, let me try one more time. Can you hear me?
Now we can see.
We're good.
You can hear me? Oh, I
Yeah.
can see all of you again. Okay, that looks promising. Okay, perfect. I'll just keep going then in hopes that we could get through as much as possible before it happens again. Okay, so training, what I was saying is training should happen soon after appointment and should not be considered a one and done. You really should, as you're going, think of the things that that are coming across, and knowing, not worrying about saying, hey, this is something we have not been trained on, or we might need more information about it, and we need someone in here to talk to us about this. It is more than appropriate, and I think often overlooked, that board and commission members deserve training as often as is necessary. I think training should be provided by a combination of civilian oversight experts, community and government organizations, law enforcement, and she should be developed to meet the needs of all skill levels. There may be some people who have a great level. This is a great example. You often have people on boards who are attorneys, so they have a great understanding of the legal aspects of what's being discussed, but you have lots of people on the board who are not attorneys, and that is not something that they're as familiar with. So making sure that everybody has that information and it's presented in a way that is accessible, no matter background, is really important. Refresher courses always are needed. In addition to providing members with a clear understanding of the authority and mandate of the agency, trainers with knowledge and experience in civilian oversight of law enforcement should provide board or commission members with an overview of oversight. And the members should also be trained on public record and meeting laws, confidentiality requirements, steps in the criminal justice process, everything from arrest to booking, to arraignment, bail, hearings, trial, and state and local laws relating to law enforcement personnel actions, rights, and privacy. All of those things are important, and they all have an impact. Having knowledge of all those things can have an impact on the work that you're doing. Also, the board should have a broad understanding of the history, the policies, the procedures, and training practices of the North Miami Police Department. Okay, next, staff and their training. So training should occur on a yearly basis for staff members. Continuing education and professional development opportunities should be offered to all of the staff. It's important to make sure that agency staff has the information necessary to conduct oversight effectively and efficiently. That has everything to do with the success of your oversight mechanism. And it's important to assemble a team of experts and oversight contacts that can be called upon to assist staff. So for instance, I know I mentioned this earlier, is oversight. One of my favorite parts of the oversight community is how willing people are to talk to other agencies to help them with issues that they're having. Oversight is hard work, and there are often things that come up that the good news, well, the bad news is those things come up, but the good news is that probably someone has already dealt with the same issue in their own jurisdiction, and they're more than willing to help provide the information that helped them get through that incident in their jurisdiction, or some great lessons learned, how they would have approached it differently next time. And that becomes really helpful for your agency. So it's really important to make sure you have those contacts. And the great news is that you have them right there. I mean, you've already heard from Lee Reed in Atlanta and Rodney Jacobs in Miami, Ursula Price, who will be in Miami-Dade at their new oversight mechanism. I just talked to her last week, and she'll be there soon. She's already started work, and she's worked in other oversight entities, so she'll be a great resource as well. So that's nice that you already have some built-in networking right in your backyard.
She'll be here in January, right?
Yes. Yes, but she's already trying. She's already working, trying to get everything in place. And I will say, I have to admit, Ursula is one of most of what I know about community engagement strategies, particularly creative community engagement strategies, I learned from Ursula Price. And so she is just an amazing person. She knows how to work with stakeholders and to rally the stakeholders for support. So I'm glad that she'll be part of the kind of oversight team in the area. The other piece is that training should be discussed with the initial funding structure in mind. And then as funding increases, then the oversight entity needs to prioritize education to ensure their staff are well trained on the skills that they need for the daily work, and that they're also aware of new developments in the field of oversight. So what is law enforcement's role in training? So to fully understand the policies and procedures and training requirements of the law enforcement agency, you have to participate in the development. The law enforcement agency needs to work with you to develop training and the delivery of that training. It's often helpful for oversight to have a more comprehensive understanding of the day-to-day role and jobs of officers, as well as their perspectives. So I think I'm going to mention this, well, I'll wait till the next slide. So the curriculum should include an overview of the training that is given to new recruits, and the relevant in-service trainings are required, that they're required to attend. And I also think that it's really important for civilian oversight to have a spot in the training of new recruits. As new recruits are coming in, they should know about the oversight agency, those that are overseeing them and their role. And in a way that could be meaningful, and by that I mean not just standing in front of the recruit class and talking to them for 20 minutes and that's it, but really figuring out a way to engage with them, ask questions, allow them to ask questions and get to know them too as they're coming in. So they'll have a better understanding that civilian oversight isn't the enemy, that it's beneficial to both community and law enforcement. And having a better understanding is a great place to start with that. And then also, board members and staff should really also consider visiting department facilities, not just headquarters and the division stations, But think about communication facilities and detention facilities. I think, I remember reading a lot of complaints that really started, the complaints started from the moment that someone called 911. And so going to the communication center and knowing how that process worked helped us understand better how then officers are dispatched to a scene, how people are trained to talk to the public who are calling in, talking to special units such as canine, homeless or unhoused outreach, gang suppression, school resource officers, bike patrol units, all getting to know all aspects of the department just makes it easier to do your work because you have a more holistic view of the department and how they're trained to interact with the community in all different sorts of circumstances and levels. Okay, so next, envisioning a training program, and I'm sorry that this is so small, and I will provide, well, you guys have the slides, but if you can't read the slides on the piece of paper that you have, I can print this one off specifically, so it's a little easier to read. So in a training program, there's classroom work. So you develop curriculum with the law enforcement agency, you talk about topics that are important to the work you're doing and the types of incidents you're seeing. And the end result is getting the knowledge you need to be successful. I also think that ride-alongs or equivalent immersive experiences are incredibly important. If at all possible, I would suggest ride-alongs. There are ride-alongs are a great way to better understand law enforcement, and it's a great way for them to better understand oversight and the people who are doing it. Being in a car with someone for 4 to 8 hours that's a lot of time for conversation. And it's also helps you actually see what you've learned in practice. I would say, so there are cities whose oversight entities have mandated number of hours. Like for instance, in Indianapolis, they're required to do 16 hours of ride-alongs. And what inevitably happens is there are those people who do all of their hours in December because they've waited all year to do it. What I can tell you is that make sure if you're doing ride-alongs that you make sure that you do them in different parts of the city, that you do them at different times of the year, different times of the day, and different events. Because you're going to see completely different aspects of policing if you do that. I can only talk about my experience here, but me, for instance, July on the Near East Side at 2 o'clock in the morning is a lot different than the downtown core on a Saturday in May at noon. It's very different. And you see how police approach situations differently. And so it can tell you a lot. It also helps you have a better understanding of where the complainants are coming from. Particularly if you're doing a ride-along in a portion of the city that you don't live in, don't know much about, it'll be a learning experience and in many cases an eye-opener. Now, there are some people who don't feel comfortable being in a car with an officer at all. And so, but it's still important to get that interaction because one of the main points of civilian oversight, or one of them, is the building of bridges between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. And so this is an excellent bridge building opportunity when you're having this interaction. And so if there is someone on your board, if you don't feel comfortable being in the car, then that's fine, but let's find another immersive experience. Maybe that is, maybe you have someone who walks, they have a walking beat downtown. Maybe it is going and standing outside with them at a major event in the city. We have an event in Indianapolis every summer called Black Expo. And so, which generates a lot of police complaints. And so going and standing in the middle of it on the corner, watching police and community interact gives oversight members a much better idea of why those complaints are occurring, but also gives a better understanding of why maybe law enforcement are taking particular actions. And it also gives a great perspective of how maybe law enforcement could be approaching certain aspects of their patrol during that time differently, to better serve the community. So the duration of the training, so there's onboarding training like you're doing now. In your policies and procedures that you put together, since you don't have mandated amounts of training in your ordinance, I might suggest that in your bylaws or policies and procedures that you put together, that maybe you put some requirements in there to make sure everybody is getting the training that they need.
Tammy, hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Rosa, what's in your, Rosa was asking in reference to our bylaws and the training. So on the first tab of 4, part 4, we put start meeting is kind of start crafting like saying know of that because it really doesn't talk the training. So as part of the ongoing training, she's talking about kind of like here today what you're doing, I think you kind of spell that out because the training that you all have gone through needs to be out. It says, oh, whatever, what have you. So I had to work staff with NACO laying out this training for you guys. So those who come after you, we have a roadmap to work with.
Now, I mean, I had that question because I read today the Cedar Rapids.
Right.
So I was wondering if we had already this one in place or we will be the one to craft it from the start.
You all will be as a board the ones that craft to put the bylaws in place. Right.
Yeah, but now the bylaws have to narrowly track the ordinance.
It needs to be in alignment to the ordinance, but it doesn't, it goes a little bit deeper, right? Tammy, you can elaborate a little bit further to Kevin's question that he's asking, related to examples of what bylaws really encompass when it comes to civilian oversight.
So effectively, if the ordinance doesn't address training and we put in a lot of training in the laws, does that really lead to a conflict? And it would be determined that your training doesn't meet the ordinance, you can't pursue that.
No, the ordinance is, the ordinance was kind of, as you can see, was kind of gray and kind of broad.
It's broad.
The bylaws actually complements what that ordinance says. So even though they say be trained by NACO, we're being trained by NACO, but we're actually going through in depth and we're laying out what those trainings are. So it's not a conflict. It's just we're actually like spelling it out. Have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think you answered it, Dr. Harris. I would just only add that it would only be in conflict if it completely contradicted what was in there. So for instance, if your ordinance said that training was not required, but then your bylaws required it of members, then that would be a contradiction. But
and we may come across, and then the other piece is, even though we don't spell, there may be trainings that come about 6 or 8 months in the work that we find out when we're doing, for example, if you're doing a ride along with a police officer, or you happen to go sit in one of the police officers' trainings on mental health, right? Say they do a mental health training. Say, for example, you decide to go sit in one of their mental health trainings that they have. And then you ask, as a follow-up to that, can I see your policy procedure that ties to this training that you all are doing, right? That doesn't preclude that we as CIB staff and board members should get trained in mental health stuff too, as well, right? Because if you're gonna be looking at their policy procedures, it's kind of important, especially because the industry kind of changed in our community and so forth. And as Rabbi was dealing with a resident who's homeless and so on and so forth, those types of things are kind of like important for us to be kind of on our P's and Q's about, you know, a little bit, because things change.
And it's only when we understand the police point of view and action, I would say, or policies, that we can try to understand the citizen and bring them together, either to change the action or the way the resident think about it, or to change the policy to match whatever it is that we need to address.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Okay. And then, so one last thing I'll say about the duration is that I would also say that in your bylaws, if you do choose to put something about training requirements, that there should be an overall training requirement, but sometimes it is helpful if there are some quarterly requirements to help those who might be more on the procrastination side of things, to make sure that they're getting training throughout the year rather than all lumped together. And when, and when you're looking at the training requirements, or the content providers are really important. And it's not just, you know, content providers, this has been a pretty good example. You've had, your attorney has come in and said things. You've had oversight experts come in. Some other people are members of civil rights organizations that could talk about constitutional policing, talk about what Know Your Rights training could maybe look like if you wanted to partner with someone to do that. Mental health organizations, and the list goes on. There's so many opportunities to get training because this is such a multifaceted issue when you're looking at these complaints and when you're looking at how police are interacting with the public. And just hearing from the police, just hearing from oversight doesn't really give you the full picture of or the full amount of knowledge that you might need in any given circumstance. Before I move on, I'll just say that because we were talking about the bylaws, and it sounds like the Cedar Rapids one was circulated, I do have another one I'll be able to send you on Wednesday for the oversight entity who is just that they'll pass them on Wednesday. So I can't really send out, I'd rather send you the final rather than the draft. And it takes the Cedar Rapids ones quite a bit further, which might be helpful as you're looking at developing your own.
Thank you.
Okay, so next, let's talk about challenges and opportunities. So as we go into this section, I know you don't have a full board there, and I'm assuming that at least Rabbi has left, and I don't know if anybody else has had to step out or not.
Pierre had to leave. Yeah, Pierre had to leave on family emergency.
Okay. Okay. Well, so these are some things that we'll have this conversation with those of you who are there, including staff. I think it's important for everybody to participate, but I think it's important that this is a place where you get to talk more. And so as we start that conversation, I think it's important. So some of you may be familiar with the concept of Sankofa. And so Sankofa is a West African symbol of the Akan, people who, as you can see, it's normally there's a little egg on the bird's back as well. But the bird has its feet firmly planted forward, and it's moving in a forward direction, but it's looking back all the time to make sure that it's not forgetting its past, even as it's carrying its future forward. So saying the concept of Sankofa, looking back as you move forward, to very much simplify it, is a very important symbol and concept for NACOL as a whole. And so I think as you're doing the work that it's important to remember the history of North Miami, and understanding that it is a very long history. You're talking about history from the Seminole and the McCuskegee to when North Miami was called Arch Creek, to all the way up until today, and all of those incidents that have happened along the way that create North Miami and its collective history. And then I think it's important that you keep that in mind, but also to say, why was the board established? What does North Miami want? What do the community members want? And when I'm talking about community members here, I'm really talking about broader community, because every stakeholder that you will encounter, whether it's members of, whether it's the youth in your community, or it's the law enforcement in your community, your elected officials, all of those are part of the greater North Miami community. And so what does North Miami want? And I think it's really important to start talking about what you want your legacy to be. You individually and the work that you're doing on the Citizens Investigative Board, or for the board itself as a whole. So keep those in mind. And the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about challenges. And what I want all of you to think about is, what are the challenges that you see in your work going forward on the board? And for the agency itself, it doesn't have to be limited to just you personally.
I'll allow board members to start off first. So, Kevin.
Well, obviously, I think the training issue is going to be essential to our grasping what we need to do in the coming year.
You said training?
We're in a municipality that doesn't have very many police shootings, maybe every 4 or 5 years. But there are a lot of other issues that the board possibly could be involved in, where we would need to learn and understand police training policies and procedures, and provide perhaps input on whether or not some of these policies and procedures could be improved without telling the police department how to do their job. So this is a long-term learning curve. This isn't something we're going to get a handle on in 6 weeks, maybe in 6 years, but not in 6 weeks. So I think training is going to be absolutely essential for the coming year as we get out on the road.
Great, thank you for that, Kevin.
One of those things, I think, has to be revising the appointment process in terms of service. You don't want to expend a great deal of time and effort getting trained just to find out that the person who appointed you is suddenly no longer on the council, and you're not there anymore. So what do we do with that investment in training? So
more of the ordinance.
Yeah, so
Policy changes.
Yeah, the ordinance probably needs to be modified.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who usually participated in many social events, one of the things that I could point out is how to be more persuasive in terms of having the community participate in all the activities that the decision makers, including police and the council, I mean, every entity, whatever they would put into like investment in social events for the community, I notice a type of probably, I wouldn't say reluctancy, probably it's a lack of information or lack of interest. So therefore, if we could have some sort of training based on data that we would require to see from different actions or different activities that the police took in the past. Based on these data, we could see or we could pinpoint where exactly we need that training, what type of training we need in order to persuade, to influence, to attract the residents of North Miami so that they can, together with the police, become one and move forward. Without data from past experience from both sides, we might find ourselves in a difficult position to identify the type of training, the right training, because we won't do training just for the sake of doing training. We need the training to be effective with goal in mind, however, based on past experience and data, information that will bring positive outcome. That's what I would call it. So data first, in order to identify the right training for better outcome, and most importantly for participation, because you can be trained, however, the success of the training or the result is not effective.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I'm not capturing this correctly at any point, don't hesitate to let me know.
Thank you. So I'll let Amber think about it a little bit more. Something that I think that comes to mind from a staffing perspective for me, a couple things. One is a system change, right? A system change of creating a structure and a system that's set up to be more of a preventive versus a reactive type system. So this organization that we're establishing, this department operation that we're establishing on the city manager's operation is not set up in a situation where we are being responsive based on a crisis of something happening current. We want to create a system across all departments and understanding that if we do have an incident that does occur, we've all been trained, as you talked about, but how do we have the system and structure and operations of dealing with it versus in crisis where you methodically can't think through things because everybody's just trying to, it's organized chaos. The benefit of this system that we're creating is being a very proactive process, right? We're not waiting for like a George Floyd incident to occur or a Nicholas Cruz mass shooting that occurs, and now you're trying to deal with it. We're in a better position of a system change. And so to create that system change is to get buy-in. And that buy-in sometimes could be difficult from an operation of staff across the whole system as a city. It can be a difficult buy-in from the elected officials, meaning council members that are elected, because they have to deal with things at hand of what's coming across their desk, whether it's dealing with septic and sewer, whether it's dealing with sidewalks, whether it's dealing with their parks and rec crisis, whether it's dealing with community development, dealing with affordable housing situation. This is not prevalent on the front of their eye until something occurs. So that's the challenge for me from being the executive director, is letting everyone know that, yes, I'm here. We're not going to sit here on our hands and not do anything. No, we're going to establish a board. We're going to establish policy procedures. We're going to start getting our individuals trained. We're going to start getting outreach of the community aware about different things, because it's a system change, organizational and behavior change that we're dealing with. The number two area around where I see probably a challenge is from, I would say probably 16 years ago when I started this work to where I am now. Is 16 years ago, I might not have looked at this from a trauma-informed lens. I'm looking at this now more from a trauma-informed lens because I've become more cognizant of it, but others in this industry and work may not necessarily grasp that, right? So when I say a trauma-informed lens, it's because that we're dealing with police officers who may have had trauma. They may have dealt with trauma as either one, they might have been former retired veterans from the military that now they're working in the police department. And there could be something that could be a trigger of something that might have happened to them in Desert Storm while they're on a call of duty. Like, how do you understand when we're reviewing a case that we're not being punitive, but we're understanding that that's a human being who may have had trauma that made poor decisions, right? How do we provide support to them? So coming from that perspective dynamically, that means now resources are going to have to be put in place. That's the third barrier. What are those resources going to look like? Are those resources dealing with cash? Are they in-kind dollars? Are they resources that may include bringing other partners to the table to really expand our footprint around this work when we're looking at civilian oversight, right? Think of things differently. And so those are like a few bullet points that come to the top of my mind where I'm thinking of challenges that we're going to need to step through. As Kevin said, this is not something that's happening in 6 weeks. When you're dealing with trauma, you're also dealing with trauma from cultural trauma. You're also dealing with trauma that may even go back to as PTSD, but post-traumatic slave syndrome trauma that has affected children of generations. So when you're dealing with young adolescents and youth and teens, and when our part 2 module training, where we're talking about how we're going to engage young people into this work, understanding that there may be post-traumatic trauma that affected them, to now get them at the table of understanding with law enforcement and police related to that support system and them being part of community. So I'll stop there because I know I probably said a lot, Ken, and use one off camera.
No, those are great.
I so agree with you because it is something sometimes that they cannot control, because it becomes, it's a problem that they have brought into their life and they cannot control it. In fact, it becomes a gene. They were born with it, even from their parents, you know? So when you can identify this, for example, and when something happens, instead of sending them to prison, you send them to a medical facility where they can be treated instead of being considered as a felony, for example, for them to be kept in prison. So it is very important what you just mentioned. And also sometimes there is a reaction to a police action is because they fear by lack of knowledge on how to behave.
Thank you. Very good point. Anything else anybody wants to add to this?
Dan, I don't know if you heard the answer. I'll allow her to repeat it again.
The ordinance and the training in mind, because with the changes with the way it goes with the board members, it kind of makes it where, like you said, when we go through the process of training everyone, then things come up, or when a council member leaves, then we have to pretty much do the whole process. So kind of trying to train everyone on that and how to go about getting the process restarted all over again.
So the ordinance is definitely a big deal. Tammy, from the perspective of NACO, has there been any training tied to the DEI&B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging type trainings where you've all have collaborated with agencies like GARE or REI, any of those types of organizations?
Yes, so we know of, there are, one of the reasons we don't do that training is because there's so many people who are, that is their thing. And there's some great options out there. GARE is one of them. There's several agencies out there that, or cities actually, that have partnered with GARE to go through the whole program, which is great because then it also included all of the officers.
So that's something that if you can make a note on there, is a reference to collaborating partners. And those partners could include IEE, GARE, REI, which is the Racial Equity Institute, or the National League of Cities. National League of Cities has the REAL initiative under National League of Cities, NLC.
Okay, perfect.
And Camille, if I may,
Yeah.
talking about challenges, budget can be a big challenge. We may want to go as broad as possible in terms of training, but we are restrained. We may be restrained by budget.
Yes.
So that's a huge challenge, I can say.
Well, we were challenged this budget cycle, believe it or not, on the second hearing, and this is why I couldn't go to the NACO conference, was because there was conversation that we lowered our millage. When we lowered our millage, there was cuts. My investigator actually was taking out the budget. So like that it affect budget is a big factor. So
yeah.
We definitely got to keep an eye on that and trying to come across other diversified funding stream operations that can help support our work. So as board members, if you all ever see anything out there in reference to helping fund programming or help for operations for staffing, please let me know. I mean, I have a grant writing background, so I got no problem writing grants if needed.
And of course, we have to take into consideration technology.
Oh, technology, yes.
Technology, it's another huge factor in communicating, in collecting data, etc.
Absolutely. Some others, so this is an amazing list, and excuse me, and I think that I just always have kind of a cheat list here as well, some other things to also think of. Of course, you've already said some of the things like trauma. Another one to consider is that the community, well, everybody has very high expectations when a new oversight entity is put into place. They want to see, going to another one on the list. There are many people who are beyond the point of change can't wait. And we're tired of waiting for change. And so they expect that an oversight entity can be put in place. It's magic is going to happen and all of a sudden things are going to get better. And it is not a sprint. It is a marathon. This kind of change, that system, organization, behavior change that you mentioned, Dr. Harris, is long. It is a long game. It took a long time to get here. And unfortunately, it's not going to be a quick fix. Some other challenges, fear of change, skepticism from law enforcement and from the community, to be fair, about whether or not what this will or will not do. there's often a lack of understanding of oversight and its role. Another challenge can be impartiality. It's really hard to come into a position where, from a place where we all have opinions. Most of us are working for change in our communities, and then to come to oversight where all of a sudden you can't really be pro this or pro that. You have to be there for the process that's been laid out in front of you so that you can be impartial and fair. That's hard. It's definitely a challenge. Working so that you have legitimacy on both sides. You mentioned the training and the need for it. Trying to make everyone happy and meet all of their demands. And also the challenge that, some stakeholders think others cannot be engaged, which makes your work harder because you're trying to engage everybody. And there's members of the community that think that you should not be engaging with law enforcement. And there's law enforcement thinking that you should not be engaging with certain members of the community. Excuse me. And so trying to make sure that you're engaging with everyone and helping everybody be part of the process while still being impartial, there's just nothing more challenging. Rose, were you going to say something? I saw your hand.
Were you saying something?
No, I said that the last line, the last bullet of yours, it's in agreement with what I mentioned earlier in terms of having the community to get engaged, to participate in most activities that the city is overtaking or is doing.
Absolutely. So we've talked about challenges, and the interesting thing is I think it's important to also talk about the opportunities you have. And it's also important to think that some of the challenges you have are maybe also opportunities.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are some of the opportunities that you see here moving forward?
The opportunities that is very clear to me is the willingness for betterment of the city. As long as we could do a good job, I think that the residents of North Miami, North Miamians, they are ready to chip in. They just need some lead, some good lead, and some trust as well. So the opportunity is we have the residents. They have the goodwill, they need leadership, and they need some trust. So sometimes when what I notice, something happens, they don't trust what happened or the others, and then everything else just tends to fall behind. As long as this trust is established, they are there, and I think we have approximately, over 60,000 residents in North Miami. So therefore, if we do a good job, the opportunity, we can bring all those 64 plus residents into the game.
I love that. Thank you.
No, I don't feel comfortable addressing it at this point yet. I just feel that there's a lot of opportunity, but I can't really enumerate it at this point.
Understood.
For some of the changes to be able to be taken effect, probably as far as like the ordinance, I think it may be able to be changed. That's something I see that could probably help.
I think I might have missed the first part of what you said. I just want to make sure I get all of it.
Possibility of changes yeah, with the ordinance and the policies that we have.
Okay, perfect.
I think from an opportunity perspective, you know, having a city manager who really supports this work, having a mayor who was the author of this legislation from elected officials, and having a police department that supports, from a leadership perspective, the police department supporting our work, I think opens the door for great opportunities for growth for us. Those three pillars of the three, I would say, three-legged stool: city administration, mayor and elected officials, and police department leadership with civilian oversight. We have those three collectively working as a team. There's so much opportunity and growth for the work that we do, and respect for the work that we will be doing to benefit, to give a voice and a space for our residents of our city. And that's what's so critical, is being able to have an opportunity of having a space that's neutral, and independent for residents to be able to come voice any great positive things or any things that are, you know, make them feel uncomfortable.
Thanks for that. Anything else?
Maybe it for right now.
Okay. Well, as luck would have it, I also have a little list for this one too. So, and you'll notice that several of the things here are in both places. So you've got a lot of the moment that we found ourselves in following George Floyd's death. I mean, this work has been needed and has been going on for a very long time. But what we have seen now is that there is the opportunity in many more jurisdictions to make oversight happen proactively rather than in reaction to a very specific community event. And when that happens, you often see oversight being set up in a way that is just to kind of put out a fire. Whereas what we're seeing right now are oversight entities that are being formed in a more thoughtful way that's leading to more effective and sustainable oversight over time. And you guys are a great example of that. That doesn't mean that there weren't incidents that might have led up to the creation, but it took kind of that national sense of fierce urgency to really push particularly elected officials and many law enforcement leaders kind of over onto the side of support. Community trauma is also an opportunity. It's a way we are now starting to better understand community trauma, and people are now understanding the need to address it. Government support oversight is at a way, is at a level that we have not seen previously. Calls for reform, defunding, abolition have all led more jurisdictions to look at civilian oversight as an option. A great opportunity is that oversight can center on those most impacted. It allows for the demonstration of legitimacy, looking at how policies or procedures can be changed for the better, defining the role, the work, the outcomes. One of the things that is great about this point in an oversight agency is kind of the world is your oyster, particularly given some of the places in your ordinance where you have some ability to kind of create things like training. your community engagement strategies, all of those things. You're going to be able to define those and lead the organization in a particular direction. And a great opportunity that you have is that as an oversight entity, you better probably than anyone else have the ability to engage all stakeholders. You're this neutral, independent body that can engage with all to help really kind of further the reform, further building the bridges between police and community, promoting better policing and better understanding. And really, oversight is in a league of its own in the ability to do that. So,
and we're at like probably about 10 minutes left too.
I just noticed that. And so I was trying to think about the most important things. So actually, I'm going to go, I'm going to skip a few slides here. And I'm going to go towards the end here. And the good news is that when we were talking earlier about the different models, we did talk about legitimacy in policing and in oversight and how important it was. And so knowing about how you're building legitimacy, how you're building expectations, how you're working on deciding what your legacy is going to be in this work, I think the next steps are really to talk about what your commitment to legitimacy is in oversight and policing in North Miami is. And that could be very broad brushes and strokes, or it could be very specific things. Like you've mentioned many times, the need to make some changes to the ordinance. Some of that could be to clearly or to further define your role within your bylaws. So we don't have, with 8 minutes left, we really don't have time to really give you time to think about that. But I would like all of you to give that some thought over the coming days. And I'd love if there's time, Dr. Harris, in future meetings for you to kind of talk about this further, because I think that this will begin kind of giving you a roadmap for the direction that you're going to take from this point. So I think that was going through about 15 slides in about a minute and a half. So are there any questions? Because I'm assuming, Dr. Harris, you have a little bit of business you'd like to take care of at the end of the meeting.
There's a few things the vice chair allowed me to just to mention this more.
Go ahead, sir.
So because our first official meeting convening together will be on February 13th, I wanted to take the opportunity in January for CIB to go observe and watch our colleagues with the City of Miami, CIP, the Civilian Investigative Panel, that's what they're called, CIP. They're meeting on January 17th. So I wanted to use that month of January for our board to go observe, see how the board functions. You can see how the cases are done. You can see how the investigations go forward. You can see how, to see the whole process of how it occurs. Their meetings start at 5:30. So I wanted to find out from you how you felt about that.
Well, right now I'd say positively, I'm relatively open in January at this point in time. How many of these meetings would there be?
No, we're just going to this one in January.
Just one.
Yeah. We'll just go collect this group. If you want to go individually on your own.
Do you know when this meeting is?
Yes, it's January 17th.
And it's going to be where?
City of Miami's their city hall. They meet in their city hall.
Which is, where is that now? Down on Dinner Key, or did they move it?
Yeah, it's down by Coconut Grove area.
Yeah. see what
I can send it as a calendar invite to everyone, because of course I have sunshine, because we'll all be together collectively. But I would use that as an opportunity, as kind of that on the road training type type thing. And especially having our colleague in our back door, I just figured it'd be a great opportunity for, now that we got through this training, you kind of see how things kind of go based on what Kim has shared, and kind of see how a board actually is functioning and handling the cases.
I'm open to all type of training and meeting, etc., as long as my schedule allows me to do so.
Okay.
So far, I mean, since we just announced it, I am kind of open,
Okay.
but bear in mind that based on my type of work, anything can pop up at any time.
Anything can pop up anytime. Yeah. But
so I would just let
even if you can't get there right at 5:30, you come later, or if you have to leave early, that's fine. I just wanted to give an opportunity for you to see how a board functions, see the type of case they deal with. And they'll provide you some examples and samples of what a case looks like, what a report looks like, what the final outcome of a report is once it's done, and so forth.
Yeah.
All right, good. So I'll send that out to everyone. The other piece is with the work that we're doing, and Cammie had brought to our attention related to NACO, there is a organizational membership to become members of NACO. And now that we have our board in place, I just rather go ahead and just, because I don't know how many we'll have, I'd rather just pay our organizational membership.
Yes.
So then it covers whoever's on the board.
That becomes a part of expense to, the budget expense.
Well, it's automatic at 500. Is it 500? Cammie, for our organizational membership, is that correct?
Yes.
So we'll just pay the $500, and then we'll get all your information and register you, and then you'll get a package and so on and so forth. But I think it's important as staff, we obviously are members, but I think as board members that you all become affiliated with the national network too, as a professional organization. Then you have a chance to access and connect with other board members across the country, and so forth. And you also get access to training that may come up for board members that you do virtually and so on and so forth. So you'll get notifications. So it kind of helps you stay on your P's and Q's of stuff. And if you notice something, when we have a board meeting, you can bring that information and share it with the rest of the board. Yeah. So we want to be able to give access to that.
Yeah, we could have best practices as well to be
Yes.
done.
Yes. And even if it comes across this opportunity for you to be able to speak on something out the gate, but there may be other civilian oversights that are going to be starting up, and they want to know, well, what are you all doing in North Miami? We know you guys have started. Can you share some information? Don't hesitate to take that opportunity to do that too. All right.
Okay.
So, and then when we meet in February, we can have that conversation with the bylaws with Wednesday. When she sends us the information, I'll send that out to, you said Wednesday, right, Cammie? You sent it to us Wednesday?
Yes.
I'll send that to you all, so you have a chance to review that and look at that and take it from there. And Mr. Vice Chair, thank you. That concludes mine. I want to continue to follow the rest of the agenda.
All right, is there any further business to come before the CIB at this time?
Have any other type of business?
Hearing none, then this meeting is officially adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
You can meet with pleasure.
All right, Cammie, we'll schedule a time